Good to see each of you here tonight. Well, here we are, last sermon of our series on the evidence of things not seen. I hope you've enjoyed this half as much as I have. Hope you've enjoyed it all the way as much, but I've enjoyed preaching through these lessons this year, and just a broad topic, a lot of information. And so tonight will be it for our topic. We're going to talk about objections to the evidence that God exists. Going to look at some arguments, or at least questions, that people raise about the existence of God. And as we always want to do, we want to be reasonable, we want to be logical in our thinking, and of course, biblical in all of this. So let's get after it. First of all, the question of who created God. No one created God. Next question. When you think about that question, that seems like a pretty normal question. You've probably heard it or thought it before. But when you're thinking about the universe, I mean, really, you don't really have a lot of options, right? You either have a universe that has a chain of causes that stretch back into infinity, or there must have been a beginning. There has to have been a first cause that started everything, including time. And of course, even science would say that space, matter, time has a definite beginning, but there has to be something that brought all of that into existence. The Bible, of course, states very simply that in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And the effect of creation is, we see God being greater than all of those things. So, there's just not a lot of ways to go with that. Either it was infinite or it wasn't. And if it wasn't, then you have to conclude there was a beginning. So either God is the beginning or it's something else. And we'll talk about some of the other aspects later. But in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And you have to think about then, does it take more faith to believe that the universe has always existed, or that it's reasonable that there is an infinite, eternal God who created all things? So anyway, it's a starting point for our study anyway, and certainly one that we need to think about, and people need to think about, where all of these things have come from. So it's a good thing to consider. All right, so then what's the scientific evidence? Well, we talked a little bit about this. Of course, a lot of this is some overlap with some other lessons, but when we think about the first law of thermodynamics, when we're going to talk about evidence of things, the law states that energy can be changed from one form to another, but it can't be created or destroyed. So the amount of energy and matter within the universe is constant, but its form can change. And we understand that in a lot of ways. You put gas in your car, the car goes, there's chemical reactions, the fuel and all of that is transferred into energy, motion, heat, noise, all of that. But it's just changed. It's not really gained or lost. It just changes form. You have a pile of wood and you put fire on there. It produces heat as the wood is consumed, and you have this energy transfer. All right, what's that have to do with anything about creation? Well, if natural processes do not create energy or matter, then how do we get to where we're at with the universe? It had to have come from an outside source. It couldn't just happen, right? It had to have come from an outside source. And if nature cannot simply create non-living matter, nature can't just create energy on its own, how is it possible that it somehow created any form of life, not to mention more complex organisms? And so this shows us that the universe just didn't create itself. again, either it's eternal or it had a beginning. And really those are the only two options that we have. So, we've all heard about the Big Bang Theory, which is the prevailing theory that claims the universe began somewhere between 15 and 20 billion years ago. And for the most part, people believe that there was a super dense dot or kernel of mass energy that exploded. And then, of course, that eventually turned into everything that we have. There's a lot of problems, of course, with the Big Bang Theory, but of course, one of the main things is, well, where did that come from? Where did this original mass energy come from to then get to where we are, let alone all the processes involved in all of that? And so, again, believing the Big Bang Theory seems to me to take more faith than believing that the universe was created. Let's go to the second law of thermodynamics, and that is that there is a tendency to move towards disorder and decay in this universe. We, of course, recognize that. We know that if something is alive, what's going to happen? It's going to die. If you have a machine, no matter how nice the machine may be, what's going to happen? It's going to wear out. If you leave a building to itself, what happens? It crumbles. It doesn't get better, it gets worse. Stars burn up, things go towards decay. All of that indicates that there is a beginning, that it's not an eternal universe, but that it had a beginning. Yes, there are events of increasing order in our life, such as building an automobile or the development of an unborn child. Those aren't opposed to the second law of thermodynamics, but rather they're examples of things that happen when there is outside help. When intelligence takes on something to design and puts effort into that, then we see order and things like that taking place. But that doesn't do away with the overall trend of things being left to itself, going towards disorder and chaos. Our sun is burning, but do we think that it's just going to do that and last forever without some sort of a outside help? Or what's going to cause that to either last or not continue? And so all of that shows us that there must have been a starting point. Again, the Bible gives a pretty simple explanation to all of that. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The New Testament that we just read for our scripture reading in Hebrews 11 and verse 3, by faith we understand that the worlds were framed by the word of God, so that the things which are seen were not made of things which are visible. And so we have creation, we have things being created that are not seen, turning into things that are seen. So, another objection. The universe developed naturally over many years. If you place the date of the Big Bang Theory far enough in the past, then natural laws would develop over time to bring about design and order. Well, first of all, you still have to think about what we just talked about with the previous points. How did all of this get started in the first place? Where did it all come from? Every effect had to have had a cause. What started this Big Bang? If you're going to take that position, where did this dot of mass energy, of kernel of mass energy come from? All of that is important to think about. But also you have to think about that, it's not possible to demonstrate that design and order develop if you give it more time. How do you do that in a laboratory? But we know in all these things we've been talking about, it's just the opposite. The more time you have, the more disorder you have, the less ordered things become. And that's something that can't really be denied. the universe and all that we have doesn't just go towards more order, but rather it goes the opposite direction. So just saying, well, if you give it enough time, all of these things would happen and be orderly. I mean, that's just a big assumption to make that's not provable anywhere and is the opposite of just what we see in normal everyday life. So not really a very good place there. What about the idea that there is no order and design in the world, only chaos, disintegration, and death? Well, yeah, there's a lot of chaos and disorder and death around us. And we just talked about from the second law of thermodynamics why that's true. But we also know there's a lot of other natural laws that are constant, whether it's gravity, whether it's laws of motion, all kinds of different things like that are still operating, that are still constant, that still show us a great order that is around us. And there's just an overwhelming number of really tremendous complex designs that are out there. If you look at all into the atom or the DNA design or anything like that, or the human eye, I mean, all of those things are so intricate and complex and just show great order and design. So you can't just forget about that and think that, well, this world is just disorderly and chaotic. I mean, yeah, left to itself, that's the way that things go, but you can look around you and see great order and great design and great things that are just amazing to look into. So it's not all just disintegration and death. In the midst of all of that is all of this design and order. So I don't think we can just ignore that either in looking at the greatness that we have around us with just this earth we live in, and even when you get microscopic, just how tremendous that design really is. Another objection would be that order and design came through evolution and not through a creator. When we think about this, let's talk for just a minute about our thinking of evolution. You know, the theory of evolution describes the development of life where you have the lower, less complex forms of life evolving into a higher, more complex form of life over spans of millions of years. There are select mutations that occur entirely by chance and supposedly causes beneficial changes to a species, and that allows for the survival of the fittest to then pass along those new traits to future generations. So that's what we're talking about here. And so someone who would say, well, order and design comes through that and not through creation. So is there really any real evidence of evolution? We've talked a lot about that in this series throughout this year. And I know that's probably amazing for somebody to think about somewhere that, you know what, that it's just all around you, right? But again, it's a theory of evolution. It's not going to be demonstrated in a laboratory. Anybody who opposes God and believes in evolution hates for that thing to be talked about, that it's just a theory, because it's always talked about in terms of a fact, but it will not be demonstrated in a laboratory. Life has not ever been produced in a laboratory like that. And even if life were somehow reproduced in a laboratory, it would not be by chance. It would be under strict circumstances, intelligent scientists following a closely controlled condition. And even scientists understand that those things are not demonstrated in a laboratory. Mutations that occur randomly, I hate to say never, but generally mutations are not a good thing. Mutations are negative and destructive. They're not beneficial and do not help things. Genetic variations are not, it's not evolution. When you think about hybridized flowers and fruits and vegetables, the selective breeding of cattle or dogs or even turtles, yes, uh, those things happen, and they take place regularly. But you're working with an already existent gene pool. It's already there. There's not new genetic information being added. Uh, on the screen there is the England's light and dark peppered moths. Those are genetic variations. It's not evolution. And so all of these changes are supposed to have come through evolution by chance, but natural adaptation to the environment, that's not evolution. Genetic variation at work in nature, that's not evolution. No new genetic material or information is being added to the existing gene pool. So yeah, there's a lot of controversy there, and a lot of people that would disagree with some of that. But that's kind of the reality that we see. Those things are not reproduced in a laboratory, and it's not found in that way. There are these variations that take place, but that's far from what we see with the theory of evolution. More controversy. Evidence for evolution is not found in the fossil record. Yes, again, people don't like it when you say, you just don't see the transitional forms. You don't see the in-between species from one to another. And that's, of course, makes people mad to talk about that. But that is the reality. There's not those things that are found or seen. And it seems to me like there should be, if in fact you're going to argue for that. But that's not what we see at all. Variation in these species in transitioning from one form to another. That's not seen in the fossil record, no matter how much time has gone by. A man whose name is Stephen Gould, who was a professor of paleontology at Harvard, said concerning the fossil record, "We have sought to impose a pattern that we hope to find in a world that does not really display it." Evolution theorizes that birds evolved from reptiles, but again, there's not any transitional fossils to show those things. And those things are talked about by other scientists as well, that there's no evidence for those things. We expect to find that, but that's not something that we see. In fact, the record of Genesis indicates that reptiles came after the creation of birds, day 5 versus day 6. So it's just not something that is seen. If order and design came through evolution, then all order and design we see in nature has to be explained by evolution. You can't just pick and choose on the things that are going to come that way. If it came that way, all of it has to come that way. The evolution of the most complex species, the most complex biological mechanisms would have to be explained. How would all of that have happened just based on chance? And when you consider just how complex some things are, such as the human eye or the brain, how would these things develop over time by chance from one-cell organisms? Charles Darwin is quoted as saying that to suppose that the eye, with all of its inimitatable contrivances, could have been formed by natural selection seems, I freely confess, absurd in the highest degree. If you do much looking at that quote, you find people get irate when people who believe in creation quote that. They don't like people to quote that, and they always say, read the rest of what he said. Well, I did that, and you can read the rest of that for yourself. And of course, as he goes on to talk about it, he says, well, if this were to be shown to be true, and if that were shown to be true, and if this other thing were shown to be true, then you can conclude that it doesn't seem impossible that it would happen. And it's like, well, how does that make your case any better? If you have a bunch of ifs and then, well, it's not impossible that could happen. So I don't really see where that helps the case a whole lot to just go on to read his full excerpt there, but I'll mention it to you just in case, But I mean, he perceived that it does seem kind of outrageous and silly to consider that could be the case. But anyway, when you look at that and think about how intricate that design is, or think about so many things, a spider spinning a web, a caterpillar turning into a butterfly, how do all of these things in nature just develop by chance? How could a species survive generation after generation trying to come up with all the material to then be able to do that through mutation and evolution and all of this in order to bring that about without just not surviving? Many organisms are actually irreducibly complex, as the term is, which means that if you don't have all of that at the time, it's just not going to happen. You're not going to be able to function properly if you don't have everything you need at the time. The idea that you would somehow develop that slowly over years and years and generations, how could that happen when some of these things are so complex and they either work or they don't? How could you even get to a point of surviving if it didn't just all work? And of course, that is a problem to think about, because again, in evolution, all design, all function, all changes have to come by evolution and not through any other means. Well, let's talk a little bit about rationality and morality. An objection is that humans are not really rational or moral. Rational thought is only a chemical function of the brain, and morality is only societal conditioning. Well, if that is true, that seems really inconsistent, because if humans are not rational, then really how can we even talk about this at all? Why are we having a conversation about this? You couldn't talk about it if we're not rational. We wouldn't be able to even debate the existence of God or talk to each other like this rationally. Evidence shows us that man around the world and around history have a sort of built-in sense of right or wrong. And, at least in some way, humans are moral or have morality about them. Yeah, there's a whole issue or range of standards on all of that, but there is a moral conscience that humanity has. Yes, it can be hardened, it can be distorted, but it seems to be evident from what you can read. Murder and stealing generally across the board are viewed as wrong by everybody in the world, in just about every culture. Did that really just come about by chance? It seems that demonstrates that there is a bit of morality as a feature built into mankind. Even cultures so far removed from the Bible and the moral standard given in it seems to have at least some sort of moral compass. And we even read about in Romans chapter 2, verses 14 and 15, about Paul talks about Gentiles who do not have God's written law show that they know his law when they instinctively obey it, even without having heard it. They demonstrate that God's law is written in their hearts, for their own conscience and thoughts either accuse them or tell them that they are doing right. So there's a sense about things that people can have. And so to just think about humanity and all of that and just think that it's all about society and chance seems to miss out on the reality of things. Well, another aspect of that would be that evolution produced humans as rational, moral beings. If everything that exists came about by chance, when and how did chance then produce morality? I think that's an interesting question to think about. We don't expect morality from an intricate arrangement of molecules, right? You don't expect your smartphone that you hold in your hand to have a sense of morality, right? Even though it's just made up of molecules. So if we are just, in essence, more complex collection of molecules in a smartphone, then how and why did we somehow acquire morality? And certainly it's fair to ask, at what point did that happen? How did evolution bring us to a point where all of a sudden there is morality? And even if it's possible, and it's not, to show that rational thought came about by chance through evolution, then thought would not really be rational, would it? And if morality came about by chance, then moral values really wouldn't have a whole lot of meaning. Why would, if all of these things came through evolution, why would you get outraged if somebody stole your car or somebody vandalized your house? Why would you be all outraged if it was just random activity taking place by chance? After all, who's to say what's right or wrong, or why someone shouldn't do that or should not do that, if it's all evolution producing morality and rationality? And so when you think about that, it doesn't make a lot of sense to think that evolution somehow produced rational, moral beings that have a sense of morality in one way or another to make decisions on one thing or another. And I read this the other day when I was looking or putting together this study, but I thought it was such a good line that you can't get morals from molecules. I thought that was pretty good. That's not where our morality comes from, just because we are a collection of molecules. And when you try to slice it that way, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So wrapping this up tonight, in all the scientific talk about the arguments for the existence of God, we need to remember that we don't need to be ashamed for believing in God. We don't need to think that that's not a reasonable conclusion, or that there's not a great body of evidence that would support that, or that it makes so much less sense than what we're told by science and people who seem to be more knowledgeable in all of these things. We don't need to feel bad about what we believe in. People who choose to believe in evolution, don't realize that there's a lot of evidence for the existence of God. Certainly when you try to reason through these things, does it really make less sense that there's an all-powerful creator? Or will people just ignore the evidence? Sure, faith is required, but can we really say that more faith is required to believe in God than it is to believe that somehow there was a big bang of some kind of energy that nobody can explain where it came from? Nobody has any idea how it started, and it just all of this came from that. Does that not require more faith than to believe that there is a creator and one who put all of these things in motion? That when we look at the intricate design and order of the world that we live in, and whether it's in a microscope or it's just outside with the stars and the plants and the wildlife and all of that, can we really say, sure, it makes more sense that just happened given enough time, or that there is an all-powerful creator? Because apart from God, there are no logical explanations for explaining the existence or the complexity of the universe. There's no logical answers to just explain the things that we see in nature, or the existence of all of the human qualities that we have, such as rational and moral thought. You can't just say that evolved and that really make a whole lot of sense. But the Bible very pointedly makes out in Psalm chapter 14 and verse 1 that the fool has said in his heart, there is no God. And we need to understand that that's not something to be ashamed of when we think about God and we think about creation and all that, but rather the Bible just puts it out there for what it is. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The visible was created by the invisible, and we can see those things. And really, as Romans chapter 1 talks about, we're without excuse. If we can look at all of creation and say, it just happened, there is no God, do we really have an excuse? Hopefully, this series throughout this year has been helpful. Again, it's been helpful to me, and I appreciate your attention this year in all of this. But we're going to conclude tonight and just getting us to think about where our responsibility and our relationship is with the Lord. If your life is not right tonight, you have the opportunity to get back on the right track. And if we can help in any way this evening, we'd like to do that. If you let it be known by coming forward, together we stand and sing.
Would you live for Jesus and be always pure and good?